Hello, I am Cheyenne Turians, and I would like to begin by acknowledging my presence on the land of the Mississaugas of New Credit. Although this place where I am, Toronto, has been home to many people for thousands of years, including the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. I'm going to be reading a section of the report entitled Education. The residential school system failed as an education system. It was based on racist assumptions about the intellectual and cultural inferiority of Aboriginal people, the belief that Aboriginal children were incapable of attaining anything more than a rudimentary elementary level or vocational education. Consequently, for most of the system's history, the majority of students never progressed beyond elementary school. The government and church officials who operated the residential schools ignored the positive emphasis that the treaties and many Aboriginal families placed on education. Instead, they created a dangerous and frightening institution that provided little learning. In their mission to civilize and Christianize, the school staff relied on corporeal punishment to discipline their students. That punishment often crossed the line into physical abuse. Although it is employed much less frequently now, corporeal punishment is still legally permissible in schools and elsewhere under Canadian law. Section 43 of the Criminal Code says, quote, "Every schoolteacher, parent, or person standing in the place of a parent is justified in using force by way of correction toward a pupil or child, as the case may be, who is under his care, if the force does not exceed what is reasonable under the circumstances." End quote. The Commission believes that corporeal punishment is a relic of a discredited past and has no place in Canadian schools or homes. Call to Action 6. We call upon the Government of Canada to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code of Canada. The objectives of the schools were to strip away Aboriginal children's identities and assimilate them into Western Christian society. Doris Young, who attended the Elkhorn Residential School in Manitoba, described the experience as a systematic attack on her identity as a Cree person. Quote, "Those schools were a war on Aboriginal children, and they took away our identity. First of all, they gave us numbers. We had no names, we were numbers, and they cut our hair. They took away our clothes and gave us clothes. We all looked alike. Our hair was all the same, cut us into bangs and straight hair up to the ears. They took away our moccasins and gave us shoes. I was just a baby. I didn't actually wear shoes. We wore moccasins. And so our identity was immediately taken away when we entered those schools." End quote. In addition to the emotional and psychological damage they inflicted, one of the most far-reaching and devastating legacies of residential schools has been their impact on the educational and economic success of Aboriginal people. The lack of role models and mentors, insufficient funds for the schools, inadequate teachers, and unsuitable curricula, generally taught in a foreign language and sometimes by teachers who were also not proficient in the language of instruction, have all contributed to dismal success rates for Aboriginal education. These conditions were compounded for many students by the challenges of trying to learn in environments rendered traumatic by homesickness, hunger, fear, abuse, and institutionalized helplessness. The Commission has heard many examples of students who attended residential school for 8 or more years but left with nothing more than a grade 3 achievement, and sometimes without even the ability to read. According to Indian Affairs annual reports, in the 1950s, only half of each year's enrollment got to grade 6. Poor educational achievement has led to the chronic unemployment or underemployment, poverty, poor housing, substance abuse, family violence, and ill health that many former students of the schools have suffered as adults. Although educational success rates are slowly improving, Aboriginal Canadians still have dramatically lower educational and economic achievements than other Canadians. Education is a fundamental human and Aboriginal right, guaranteed in treaties, in international law, and in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In particular, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples contains a powerful statement on the right to education under community control. The Declaration states, quote, "Indigenous peoples have the right to establish and control their educational systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to their cultural methods of teaching and learning," end quote. The Commission believes that fulfilling the promise of the Declaration will be key to overcoming the legacy of residential schools.